Hi, I'm Michael. I'm an investor, entrepreneur, pawn shop owner, improv artist, and as always, very, very neurotic. I'm also a TV host and your host for what we call the Second Scene podcast. It is a Dweebs Global production. That is why we do the podcast, dweebsglobal.org. You can go there for free mentorship, anything from resume writing to mental health, completely confidential, completely free, dweebsglobal.org. So I'm here today with James Mendez Hodes. James
What's
is an
good?
award-winning that I messed it up and I said it was going to be easy before
You psyched yourself out, man.
I really did. I did. I made it
Yeah.
a tongue twister that didn't exist. James Mendez Hodes. Okay. James is an award-winning game writer, designer, and editor in both analog and digital games. He is also a cultural consultant, helping other creatives represent diverse and marginalized identities through authenticity and respect. I hope I said that right.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah,
He is
that's like
also
the long way of saying that people hire me to tell them that they're racist.
there you go. I bet you a lot of them don't mean to be. It's,
They're very often they don't mean to be. If they
right,
did mean to be, it would be so much easier. I'd be like, stop meaning to be, and they'd be like, oh, okay.
right.
But no.
But you're also a practicing martial artist, and you studied over a half dozen different disciplines. I had to throw that
Yes,
in.
yes.
So,
I am both proud and also not proud to admit that. Whenever you hear someone say like, "Yes, I've done 12 different martial arts," I'm like, "Did they kick you out? Did
were
you
you
quit when it got hard?"
were
Yeah,
you that bad at each one? Was it a
exactly.
can't do that
Yeah,
one, so I'll try another.
yeah.
Well, you ended up in I never say it right. Capoeira.
Capoeira.
There you go. So if that's where you are now, you couldn't have been
Yeah,
horrible at the stuff because that's one of the most
yeah,
entertaining, like
yeah,
eye-popping ones.
yeah. Capoeira and also a Japanese style called Bujinkan Budo Taijutsu. We used to refer to it as ninjutsu sometimes, but we've stopped since the rise of anime. I understand
Okay.
because people, if you say, well, I do ninjutsu, people expect that like you can like fly and disappear and turn into a log and stuff. um
Is that what happens in the anime? Is that
Evidently, yeah. But it's a Japanese battlefield style that is it's a single organization that teaches a number of different styles associated with both conventional and unconventional warfare. So there's some stuff that would be associated with what we might refer to today as a samurai. Others might be associated with what we might refer to today as the kind of samurai called a ninja. So it's a combination of battlefield espionage. There's even some like nautical stuff. Um,
so?
but
It
yeah.
sounds like it's mostly for. Is it mostly for entertainment or is it like for actual battleground warfare?
Well, it depends. I mean, for me, it's my second scene. This is entirely a hobby.
Right.
I'm probably never going to be in a position where I have to fight for my life, to win.
Right.
Um, like in a battlefield situation, I'm a little old to get into that. So I always say like a lot of people say martial arts is a way of life, and I'm like, yeah, sure, but like it started as a hobby for me, and that's important because that's where I go to de-stress and relax and not do work. But it does relate to my work in that I do a lot of cultural consulting on like historical and religious and identity topics. And
Mhm.
I've found that very often my martial arts background opens as many doors for me in that process as like my academic background.
I'd imagine
Um,
with the diversity you have in it, it sounds like it would.
yeah, yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I'm proud that I've done a lot of different styles because like for me the most important element of martial arts isn't like whether I'm going to be the best fighter. Like we live in a world with like flying death robots and
Yes.
career fighters who put their entire lives and money and training into that. Like I don't need to be the best. For me the most important thing is like meeting people and connecting with other people.
Gotcha. You have to talk to my son. My 11-year-old son walks around to a soccer game. Some kid was bullying him, and he was like, "I'm a black belt in Taekwondo, so watch out." But I'm like, "You haven't done it since before COVID. You better stop threatening people because if you don't do it all the time, it's not going to stick with you."
Zoom Taekwondo is difficult. It's a challenge. Um, so yeah, like there's lots of things about capoeira and about taijutsu which are very combat relevant. Uh, Taijutsu in particular has been adapted for use in the Marine Corps martial arts program. So it's got some current present day combat relevance, but for me, it's primarily about connecting with other people And I'm excited to fight people because I want to, be their friend and learn about them. I'm not like, I don't need to defeat them to win.
Right. And I'm guessing it's sparring. So there's no, you're not trying to make him bleed. You're just trying to
No,
get
ideally
to him
not.
first, right? Get
Blood
to him
sometimes
first.
happens,
Yeah.
but yeah, mostly you're trying to learn and you're trying to improve. You're trying to get better at fighting, but like the ultimate goal for me, I'm not going to be a competitor. I'm not going to be a soldier on a battlefield. So like for me, it's about like feeling good in my like connections with other people.
Got you. Capoeira. I can't say it.
Capoeira.
Okay. Capoeira.
Yeah,
Man.
it's more of like a little bit of an ass sound, like cap, like you're wearing a cap right now. So capoeira.
Capoeira.
Yeah.
Okay. That seems very much like entertainment. It almost seems like acrobatics in a lot of way.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the like the tactical approach of capoeira is fighting in a way that doesn't look like fighting and doesn't look threatening. Because capoeira evolved from it didn't evolve from a battlefield context. It evolved from a street context. It was developed by an urban underclass of African and mixed race people in Brazil based on older styles practiced by Europeans, enslaved Africans, and American Indians. So a combination of many different stylistic influences created it. But most of the people who were practicing it were poor city folk. And the primary danger, the primary threat that they faced was from the military police of Brazil, who were a deadly and well organized force in the times that capoeira was growing up. So going back to the earlier thing about like winning a fight against a police officer in this context, if you lived on the streets of Sao Salvador de Bahia in like just before 1900, winning a fight against a police officer wasn't like a victory condition, because now you've just killed a cop. So if you were practicing like the world's most lethal martial art, you would die almost instantly because you were so lethal. So the style focuses primarily on unbalancing, confusing, and misdirecting enemies. It's you can use it to kill someone if you have a knife in your hand or you stick a blade in your shoe, as many old school capoeira players did. But murder was never the primary goal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Did I hear that? Like you were saying that if you do it correctly, you can kill someone even without a weapon.
I guess you can.
Right.
You can always kill someone without a weapon.
Right.
It's always technically possible, but it's not easy. And generally speaking, for most practitioners of a martial art in like an urban context, as opposed to like a battlefield context, and this is something that like every teacher should teach, but is often forgotten. Yeah, being lethal is actually not super useful to most people, and often is exactly the opposite. I mean, setting aside the whole moral calculus of it.
Right.
So yeah, most of the capoeira techniques that I know are used to unbalance, to confuse, or to cause an injury that limits mobility but doesn't necessarily kill.
Gotcha.
Like the most common serious injury I would say that an unarmed capoeira technique might inflict, like you could get knocked out, you could get a concussion, and any concussion could conceivably be lethal. But an injury to your knee or your ankle that prevents you from moving, especially in the moment, but possibly you might be laid up for a long time. Those would be, I think, the most common injuries that you would get. And right. It's also the most tactically useful kind of injury to inflict for someone in that urban pre-1900 context.
Gotcha. I watch a lot of mixed martial arts, and that is often the injuries that people get, because it's the leg kicks and
yeah, exactly,
disabling.
I saw that. I don't watch a huge amount of MMA, but I did watch the Conor McGregor ankle leg injury. That was hard to watch.
That was a whole different. Yeah, that's a whole different hurt. If no one, people who didn't watch that, his leg essentially broke in half and was hanging there. Yeah, it was pretty disgusting. Yeah. That rarely happens, though. That has only happened a few times that I've seen. Do you have a favorite martial arts that you've enjoyed over the years?
I really like capoeira aesthetically. I think it really appeals to me physically, and I like that it focuses on a lot of social elements of combat.
Mhm.
It teaches you not just how to hit someone, but when to hit someone in the rhythm of an interaction with them. And there's a lot of emphasis put on sense of humor in capoeira, which
Okay.
is both for fun and for tactical effectiveness, because the moment at which something is funny is often the moment at which it's unexpected, which means that it's a good time to strike somebody.
Okay. Have you ever had to use anything in self-defense?
In self-defense, not as much. I've intervened in situations that looked like they were going to become dangerous, where I saw someone threaten somebody else.
Yeah.
Um, and in those situations, a couple of times I've intervened or physically in a way that diffused the situation. But I like to think that I'm good at recognizing dangerous situations and exiting them.
That's
Um,
that is the best route.
it is, yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to move on to the you being the cultural consultant, and
Oh
I'm going
yeah.
to. It's always a nervous subject for people that aren't involved in it or aren't thinking about it
Mhm.
every day, because at times, to me at least, it feels too easy to step over the
Yeah.
line or too easy to say the wrong thing.
Yeah,
Um, I,
definitely. And even for me, like as a cultural consultant, I always tell people all of the things that I'm telling you not to do. Most of them are mistakes I've made myself before.
mhm.
And most of the other things where I know them without having made that mistake, it's because I was lucky enough to see somebody else do it.
Got you.
Yeah.
How much of that, a lot of times this comes down to, I don't know how into politics I want to get. A lot of it comes down to the left and the right. The right saying the left is going too far with it, the right is saying the left's going too far, the left is saying the right doesn't care at all, and
Mhm.
it's almost a lot of times it's the two extremes
Yeah.
that are making
I
the
think
most
that it's
noise. And where does it fall?
I try to stay away from using the language of politics too
Mhm.
much.
Makes sense.
Instead, I like to focus on the language of harm and joy.
Okay.
So I like to focus my work on the experience of real people. If you're making something and you share it with someone and they're experiencing it, at what point in this are they likely to feel bad about themselves? At what point is this thing that you're making, that someone's playing or reading or whatever, at what point is it going to engender a situation where someone inadvertently makes someone else feel bad, and suddenly you have people fighting? And what opportunities do you have in your work to create something that's going to give someone joy, where they're going to see it and smile and feel really good and remember something about their own identity that feels validating, and then they'll go and tell somebody else how cool that thing that you made was. So those are those moments that I like to focus on. If you bring it back to real human experience,
Mhm.
then I find that it's a lot easier to share those concepts.
Makes sense. I
Yeah.
think a lot of times people don't realize, we mentioned this at the beginning, they don't realize they're being offensive, or
Mhm.
they've everything they know about a certain type of people, American Indians, for instance, indigenous
Yeah.
people, they don't realize that what they've been told, what they know, that what they've seen is actually offensive
Yeah.
and not the reality. So people make the mistake without even realizing they're making the mistake because of our
Exactly.
lack of education.
Yeah. So sometimes that comes from what we call unconscious bias or implicit bias, which is these racist ideas and assumptions about other people that we're all raised with, because they just pervade society and the way we think and talk, and especially the structures of power that we interact with so thoroughly. Um, and I think in polite society, setting aside like hate crimes, right? Um, in polite society, I think that these are some of the most common ways that we inadvertently hurt each other. Actually, not even just having to do with like identity topics, but very often, like a lot of the ways we most commonly make each other feel bad are completely accidental. And I think one of the mistakes you can make then is assuming that, like, because you meant something by accident, or rather because you didn't mean something, then it isn't necessarily going to hurt someone. And I guess like bringing that back to martial arts, you hit someone in the head, and you intend to like knock them out and give them a concussion but not kill them. If you accidentally give them a subdermal hematoma, they're just as dead, even though you didn't mean it.
Right.
And the law is going to pay a lot more attention to the fact that they're dead now than the fact that, well, you didn't necessarily mean it. So I think it's better for us, even when it's uncomfortable, to try to take a step further and take extra responsibility for the stuff that we do, right? I want to be known for being too kind. I want to be known for erring on the side of kindness.
Mm-hmm. I got you. I guess sometimes I get confused, I'm sure others do,
Mm-hmm.
as to where the line is. Like, I don't know, I've seen people wearing kimoras and that be taken as offensive because you're appropriating a different culture, whereas, you know, in college I wear them all the time because they're just so comfortable to wear to sleep, you know. So is that offensive? Like, is that
so I have a whole article about exactly this. It's on my website, jamesmendezhodes.com. You can find an article called How to Change Your Conversations About Cultural Appropriation, because like you, like a lot of other people, I found that I was having the same conversation about cultural appropriation over and over and over, and like it was just never ending.
right?
Kind of like a Groundhog Day situation.
Sorry, I've pulled you back into it.
No, it's okay. It is my job.
Right.
So I wrote an article about not necessarily how to identify cultural appropriation. There's other articles already out there about that. This article is how to stop having that same conversation over and over. And one of the ways that you get out of it is you refuse to draw a line. Because this is always what comes up when people get in conversations about cultural appropriation. People want to say, well, where do I draw the line? And you want to come up with a rule, to come up with an idea that's going to apply across many different cases, so that this problem with cultural appropriation is going to be your last one. And after that, you can just refer back to your line that you drew and everything's easy. But the line ends up actually getting you in more trouble. I think that it's more efficient to accept the fact that to a certain extent, you're going to keep having to have conversations about this, and to look at each individual situation on its individual merits and its individual context. Because even something as simple as like eating ethnic food, right? Obviously, if you go to a Mexican restaurant, purchase Mexican food from a Mexican person and eat it, even if you're not Mexican, then that's probably fine. But certain politicians,
I would hope so.
You'd think so.
Probably wouldn't even be in there. Yeah.
Right. But certain politicians can eat a taco bowl on Twitter and manage to turn it into an intercultural incident. So you've got to look at the context in which your expression lives. And when you're looking at that context, some questions that I like to ask include, who has the power here? Who's making money off of it? Was there consent? Again, if you purchase a kimono from someone and then wear it, you purchase a kimono from a Japanese person and then wear it, that's different than if you made a kimono yourself and put it on. It still might be okay, but in one situation, there was an act of consent that was involved. And money changed hands and a person from the source culture profited from it. In the other situation, that didn't necessarily happen. It doesn't mean that you can never wear that kimono. And if you wear it to sleep, it's probably going to be fine. Presumably, the entire nation of Japan is not watching you sleep. And if they did, you'd have a much more profitable YouTube channel, probably. But
you got to take notes on that one.
Yeah. But for the rest of us, you also have to consider who's being affected by this, like who is seeing this, and what is the experience of people who are directly interacting with you.
I got you.
It still feels uncomfortable, right? You still got like a bit of that prickle.
It totally does. It totally does. Because I have things where I've always had a fantasy of opening a sushi restaurant. It's like my favorite food, but it's almost like the line. I know the line's drawn there, and it's like, because I'm American, born in America, like for some reason I don't have the right to do that.
It's complicated. And then another thing to consider is that at least in my part of America, I live in the Northeast, in the greater New York metropolitan area. I would say probably a majority of sushi restaurants are run by Asian people who aren't Japanese.
Actually, you're definitely right. I lived in New York, by the way, for 12 years. So you're very good. That is very true. That is very true. Yeah.
So there's all kinds of and these are the situations of cultural appropriation that are most interesting to me, right?
Mhm.
Because there's a lot of, we talk a lot about like wearing a headdress to Coachella, like obviously that's terrible, or putting on yellow face for a movie. Like, yeah, we can probably assume that it's fair to maybe draw that line. But
Right.
For me as a cultural consultant, the most interesting situations are like the Wu-Tang Clan. Like, yeah, that's cultural appropriation of Asian culture by Black Americans, but also they're making really good music, and lots of Asian Americans identify with it and really love it. So it's situations like that, where there's all kinds of thorny issues, where there are power gradients going in both directions, people who are capable of being racist to each other, that kind of thing. Those are the things that really fascinate me as a cultural consultant. That's like the most interesting part of the work for me.
I feel like stereotypes and cultural
representation.
Cultural representation, they can kind of get mixed in with each other sometimes too.
Stereotypes are really interesting because like looking at the Asian community, for example, like we have this model minority stereotype that all Asians are these like smart and high achieving and well educated, but kind of socially awkward, or like socially retiring kind of people. And it's easy to forget that the Asian minority in the United States is like that specifically because of consciously constructed immigration policy. If you think about it for a moment, if Asian people couldn't be construction workers, then how would they build buildings in China and Japan and Korea?
Right.
Just a moment's thought banishes the idea that this must be a worldwide reality. But in the United States, there's this stereotype, which is of course unfair to individual Asian Americans like myself, who can't do math. But that's also a consciously constructed thing, that's a result of like a decision that someone in power made at some point, that we're only going to allow, or we're going to allow more Asians who are highly educated to immigrate.
Right.
So the stereotype is both unfair to individuals and often untrue, and rooted in a truth which is the result of a conscious decision by someone in power.
Right. Wow, that's very interesting. I had never, it's one of those things you never really crosses your mind. That's wild,
it's really complicated. And like, my own parents, my mom was of the generation which prioritized achievement in like Western arts and sciences, in like European manners and like the American way, to be an important part of survival. So I was raised with a lot of kind of assimilationist values that I've had to consciously deconstruct and decide whether I wanted to take or leave later in my life, once I started thinking about these things. Because when I was a kid growing up, I thought like, well, I'm just the same as everybody else. All men are created equal, and racism is over because cartoons are diverse. And of course it was never that simple.
Right. The common sense would say it should be. I mean, we are so diverse, and you'd think that everyone would accept each other because we're all unique in different ways. So why are you judging somebody else for being unique in another way?
Exactly. Yeah.
What a tricky subject, and something that you're doing on a daily basis. I would be so stressed out.
It's one of the most important things that I learned was like, there's a feeling that you get when someone tells you you're wrong. And specifically, there's a feeling that you get when someone tells you that you're wrong in a culturally or like identity offensive way. And for me, it's like I get flushed and I get warm, and I get like prickles all over my skin, maybe goosebumps, and I feel like a sort of like a tingling on my scalp, and around my neck. And I had to learn to recognize that feeling, because my first impulse is always to try to solve the problem right away while I'm still feeling that physical sensation. And I had to teach myself, you have to wait and accept that you're going to feel physically uncomfortable, and let it pass through you before you respond.
Smart. That's smart in most situations, not just this
definitely.
One. Yeah. Breathe it out. Really think about the response before you go with it.
You know who's best at this? Like watching kids be wrong. Because like a kid or a teenager, they're constantly being told they're wrong all day through school by their parents and everything. So very often, if like, you know, a 14-year-old says something sexist around you and you're like, hey man, that was kind of sexist, they'll be like, oh yeah, okay, sorry. And then they'll go on with their life. With an adult, like they would, the apology would just be starting, the 20-minute apology. No.
Yes, that is true.
Yeah.
That is very true.
Yeah.
Do you think sometimes it does go too far though, and there's just the people that are very loud that are just bringing it, because I think sometimes when it goes too far, it brings a bad name to it. It brings a bad, it makes it harder for people to understand when it is real, and when it does need to be fixed and changed.
So, so telling people who are allowed to be quieter, even if it is sometimes a good idea, rarely works. It's like, if I'm upset and you tell me to calm down, when has telling someone to calm down ever worked? I guess one way, if I feel like someone is being unproductively loud, let's say, what can I do to encourage them, to encourage a different kind of behavior? Well, in cultural consulting, one thing that I tend to encourage is to end with action items. So sometimes you just need to be upset about something and vent, right? Happens to all of us. You don't want to do anything about the problem. You just want to scream about it because screaming about it feels good. And that's a great thing to do, although maybe not on Twitter. Like hang out with your friends, go to the bar, go to your private chat, whatever. And then if I'm going to say something in public, then what I try to focus on is action items. I try to focus on, if I'm going to be loud about something, I want to be loud about things that people can change. And I want to be loud about suggesting things that people can do differently, so that they can stop feeling bad about themselves and start making the situation better. When people quote unquote go too far, I mean, I try to look at that with sympathy. It's a thing that people got to go through, and sometimes I want to be loud also. But then when that passes, the same way that like physical sensation that I talked about passes through you, the question is, what are you going to do after? What are you going to do that's practically going to make the situation better? So yeah, I guess I would get frustrated at someone if they're just loud, but the thing that they're loud about isn't exactly actionable. And if they never like push and take the next step, that's what I'm really looking for as a cultural consultant.
Okay.
Another lesson that I learned a long time ago, from the J Smooth video, how to tell someone they sound racist. It's like 2.5 minutes long, and it's the best video on the entire internet. And my whole career is founded on this one video. Is again, how are we going to be loud? We should focus not on who someone is, but on what they said and did. Because who someone is, that takes a long time to change. And if I tell someone, I think you are a racist, then they're going to talk about how many Black friends they have, all of the money that they've donated to all these good causes. I'm going to be mired in that conversation for, the next hour at least before anything happens. But if instead I focus on, hey, this thing that you said or did sounds kind of racist. Is there a way we can rephrase that? Is there a different way we can say that next time? So this is actionable feedback. These are the kinds of things that people are actually going to have the power to change. And me personally, I think that changing what's within for me often starts with changing what's without. I have to start making those little external changes and stop seeming racist before I can necessarily stop being racist. I mean, as a cultural consultant, knowing what I know about how implicit and unconscious bias work, I'm kind of going to assume that I'm always going to be racist. I was raised in a racist society. I'm always going to have that inside me. So my actionable feedback for myself, what I can do for myself is, I can change my words and actions. It's kind of a fake it till you make it kind of approach.
Yeah, no, it's something a lot of people would never admit or would never say. Because we all want to come across, or most of us want to come across as not racist at all, but we're denying thoughts that are in our head that just naturally come up, and you're like, that is not the right thought. Like that, why is that even possibly there?
Yeah.
But
but that's the way that your subconscious works. And like, that's what's kept us alive for, however many hundreds of thousands of years, the ability to make snap judgments about situations that might be dangerous really, really quickly.
Right.
And again, in martial arts, you call that like the flinch reflex, right? The part of your brain and your body that reacts and takes an action before your conscious mind catches up.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. It's a super interesting subject, and one that's sometimes difficult to talk about. So I appreciate you helping me get through it.
Problem.
The last thing I wanted, no matter what's going on, people have feelings. They might say something that, if they're getting offended by what you said, even though you don't think you've offended them, that is their feelings. That is how they feel. So like you said, an actionable approach afterwards to.
Yeah. And it's the thing I always try to remind people is that if someone calls you on something that you did, if someone says that thing you said or did is offensive, or like that hurt me, or I think that might be taken the wrong way. As the person who's hearing that, you have all the power in the situation to make it not awkward by responding in a relaxed and chill and compassionate way. If you say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. Let me change what I just said. Let me say it again." Or, "What can I do next time so that it doesn't hurt you?" Right. And if you can approach that situation, if you can let the initial flush of emotion pass through you and respond to that situation with calm and compassion, and just assume like, yeah, I'm going to keep getting things wrong. This is one of many things I'm going to get wrong for the rest of my life. Now you have the power to make that situation chill again. So don't forget that in that moment, you have the power to chill it out.
Makes a lot of sense. Good advice.
Yeah.
I want to move on to something a little lighter, which is your work in video games. So you do board games, analog and digital. So you essentially do board games and
a lot of different things. My favorite type of games are role-playing games. So Dungeons and Dragons kind of thing. They have board and card game elements, but they're ultimately pretend games, like kids on a playground pretending they're like Power Rangers or superheroes or something like that.
Right.
So this is the quote unquote adult version of that. Although I often play with kids. I've done a lot of like professional dungeon mastering for younger groups.
That doesn't sound like something should be done with kids.
It's a lot of,
no,
and yet somehow. I'm kidding. Yeah, come on. We've all seen Stranger Things at this point. It's all fun until you summon a demon by accident. But
right.
So a lot of my work as a cultural consultant and as a writer and game designer has been in tabletop role playing games. I also work in board games, in live action role playing, and in video games.
Okay. What have you done? What do you do for video games? When you say editor or designer?
So I've mostly done cultural consulting for video games.
Okay.
So the same stuff that we've just been talking about. So like if you've ever played like the Jackbox Party Pack games.
I have not.
Okay. So it's a series of comedy party games where you get your friends together and you play like comedy games, which might seem kind of familiar to you coming from an improv background. So there's like comedic prompts and you have to answer them in funny ways and people vote on like who was the funniest or whose idea they like the best. But humor, of course, can get pretty offensive pretty quickly. So that's a particularly interesting, I guess, application of my cultural consulting job. Like, how do we make sure that humor still hits and still works, but not in a way that like makes someone really upset? Because the last thing that you want to happen on your like fun comedy party night is for like someone to suddenly start crying.
Right.
Kind of kills the mood.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But yeah, and then a lot of the design and cultural consulting that I do for tabletop role playing games is again stuff that you would probably recognize coming from an improv background.
Okay, I got to try that then. I love that type of stuff.
Absolutely. There's a game called Fiasco, really really popular with improv people. actually played this game live on stage with improv folks.
Okay.
Yeah, once the audience even outnumbered us. That almost never happened, but there were more audience than players once. It was an important night for us. But yeah, it's a Fiasco is a card-based game that imitates like Coen Brothers movies.
Okay.
Any kind of a movie situation where you have a bunch of people with like powerful ambition and poor impulse control in a bad situation. And unlike in games like Dungeons and Dragons, where you're trying to like succeed against fantasy monsters and so forth, in Fiasco, you're a bunch of awful people and you're trying to take a bad situation and make it amusingly worse.
Okay.
So
That sounds like fun. That sounds awesome.
It is a lot of fun. So I worked as a cultural consultant on the second edition of Fiasco. And it also comes with little play sets like, on a cruise ship or in the Wild West or in a small suburban town. So I wrote a set of prompts and scenarios for it that's based on suburban American martial arts.
Okay, so I'm looking up the game right now while you're talking.
Nice. Yeah. So my setting is kind of in the same genre of comedy as Cobra Kai or The Art of Self-Defense. A lot of farces having to do with like Americans practicing martial arts and attempting to reach great heights of martial skill while being kind of personal disasters themselves.
Gotcha. I love Cobra Kai too. So
it's one of my favorite shows.
oh, it's great.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool. Well, I'm putting one of these Fiascos into my shopping cart right now on Amazon because I think that would be tons of fun.
You will love it.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. Thanks so much for being here again. It's James Mendez Hodes. And the website, check him out at jamesmendezhodes.com. That's James, MENDEZHODES.com. And we will post that below the podcast and below the videos. And really appreciate you being here today. Learned a lot.
Thank you so much for having me. This was lots of fun.
Yeah, this was great. So again, everyone out there, this was a Dweebs Global production, dweebsglobal.org. They give free mentorship help for people around the world, literally like every country, every language. We have somebody there to help you. It's completely confidential and completely free. dweebsglobal.org. See y'all next week.